Now the first thing I want to do is set up some controls for my colors. This isn't required at all, but it's a little bit of an efficiency booster. Since I have multiple layers that I want to be the same color, adjusting all of them at once could be a little bit time consuming. So instead of selecting everything that's red, one by one, hoping that I don't accidentally click on something that's not red, I'm going to make a control for the color red and link everything that I want to be red to it. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New, Null Object. Now Null Object doesn't do anything on its own. It doesn't render, it doesn't affect anything else. It's just an object you can use to control other things. So I'm going to move it off the screen, and then I'm going to come up to my effects and go down to Expression Controls and add Color Control. That opens up the effects controls and gives me a little color picker. I'm going to rename this by clicking on it, pressing Enter, and typing in red. Then I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Command D or Control D on a PC and rename this blue, and then duplicate it one more time and rename this yellow. Now I'll grab something that's yellow, copy this color value, and paste it into the value for the yellow color picker. Then I'll do the same thing for the blue and the same thing for the red. Now I have these three color values that are identical to the color values I have for my artwork. So what I want to do is link the red color of each one of these layers to the red color of this color picker. So I'm going to start with this top layer. I'll solo it and zoom in and then open up the layer contents. So as you can see, we have a whole bunch of different groups inside this single layer. And that's because it's put every one of these paths into its own group and given each group its own stroke. Since every path is styled the same way, with the same stroke width and the same color, I don't need all of these different groups. So what I want to do is merge all of these paths into one group. To do that, I'll switch to my pen tool, select one of these paths, then hold down Command or Control on a PC to temporarily switch to the selection tool, and click and drag a selection around all of the paths, cut by pressing Command X or Control X on a PC, selecting the first group, and pasting by pressing Command V or Control V on a PC. Now all of my paths are in that single group. But they're underneath this stroke, so none of the paths are getting that stroke styling. I'm actually going to bring this outside of the group and straight into the contents. Now that is applied to all of our paths, I'll collapse that first group and delete all of the other groups. Now if I adjust the stroke width of this single stroke, all of the paths are updated, and I have one single color value for the entire layer. Now if I come to my null and bring up the effects by pressing E on the keyboard, we can see my red, blue, and yellow effects. I'll open up the red and come back down to the color value on this stroke, and then hold Option or Alt on a PC and click on the stopwatch, which will add an expression to that value. Then I'll grab the expression pick whip and drag it up to the color value of the red effect on that null, and I'll let go. And After Effects then automatically fills in the code that it needs to reference that value. Then I'll click off of this expression, and now these two values are linked. So if I change the value of this color, nothing actually happens because it's referencing the value of this color. So if I come to that color and change the value, now that color updates. I'll undo and collapse this layer. Then I'll unsolo it. Now I'll do this same process for everything that's red inside of my composition, starting by moving all the paths into a single group and then linking the stroke color to the appropriate stroke color on this control null. And to make things even a little bit easier, since the expression is already written on the stroke of this first layer, I'll just copy it and then paste it into the contents of that layer. And that expression on the color value is preserved. So I'll continue doing this for all my other red layers. Now in the case of these flames, I accidentally left the yellow and the red together inside of Illustrator, so I need to break this up into two separate parts. So I'll start by duplicating the layer, renaming the first one Flames 1 Red, and the second one Flames 1 Yellow. Then I'll unsolo the second one, so I'm just looking at the first copy, open up the contents, and delete the yellow group. Then I'll go into the yellow layer and delete the red group. So now I have two individual layers for that flame. I'll have to do the same thing for the second flame as well. Okay, so I think I got everything that's red. To test it, I'll just change the color to something completely different, like green. Press OK, and sure enough, everything that was red is now green. So I can undo to go back to my red color, and then I'll do the same process for the other two colors. But I'm not going to make you sit through that. Alright, so now all of my colors are set up based on this null. I'll go ahead and rename this null Color Control. And as you can see, if I adjust the colors of any one of these values, all of the appropriate layers change with it. Now again, this is not at all a required step, but in my opinion it makes this type of project much simpler to adjust. But if your design isn't as complicated as mine, or if you don't mind having to select everything to adjust it, then by all means, forget about that process. But now you have a little bit of insight into a way to color manage your projects. Now is a good time to pick out your restaurant. Once you've decided which one you want to go with, go ahead and create a project on the project gallery and let me know what your choice is. You could start sketching and figuring out what you want your design to look like, but I highly recommend that you watch all of the videos in the next unit before you actually make your design. The way that this effect behaves might change the way that you approach your design. But if you've got an idea in your head and you really want to go with it, there's nothing wrong with getting started.